All right, hello everybody. This is our third screencast with regard to China's political participation, and we are talking about Tibet. And I wanted to show you this video, and I just want to give you a heads up that there's some kind of disturbing parts of it, but it'll give you a good idea of why these immolations, how they have unfolded. Hopefully the link works.
Few images of self-immolation. Few images of self-immolations have made it to the outside world. This video is of Palden Chetsu, a nun in a Tibetan area in southwestern China's Sichuan province, who set herself on fire last November. Nuns marched in protest following her death, and Tibetans held a candlelight vigil, waiting in long lines to pay their respects. Robbie Barnett, a Tibet specialist at Columbia University, says that as the number of self-immolations grows and occurs in more areas, the sands of time for Tibetan patients in China appear to be running out.
There is more nationalism in these Tibetan areas than there was probably at any time in history. And this has come probably as a result of bad Chinese policies that have just got more tough and more aggressive in the last 15 years especially.
Last March, 20-year-old monk Putsong set himself on fire on the third anniversary of a bloody crackdown on protests at Kirti Monastery in Aba, or Gnaba in Tibetan. Most of the first 8 self-immolations were carried out by Kirti monks in Aba, but gradually the incidents have spread. Steve Marshall is a senior advisor for the Congressional Executive Commission on China, who has spent more than 2 decades researching human rights violations in Tibetan areas there.
But what we're having as the immolations move out, we are having precedents set. In more and more counties we're seeing precedents established for self-immolation. And this is something Tibetans are going to remember for a long, long time.
In response to the immolations, China has tightened security in Tibetan areas and branded those who burn themselves to death as terrorists. Beijing has also accused Tibet's exiled spiritual leader, the Dalai Lama, of supporting the acts, an accusation both the Dalai Lama and the Tibetan government in exile rejects. The head of the Tibetan government in exile, Lobsang Sangay, says his administration does not encourage any form of protest in China because it knows the consequences of such actions.
If you protest in Tibet, more often than not, you get arrested, you get beaten up, sometimes tortured, then sometimes you disappear, sometimes you die.
But acts of self-immolation, Lobsang and others say, show how desperate Tibetans in China have become.
The immolations are marking a very important change where what is going to happen in the future for Tibet is going to be decided by the decisions of people inside Tibet. And these immolations are a very visible, very tragic kind of decision. But they're a political statement.
It's unlikely, Tibet analysts say, that protests against Chinese policies in Tibetan areas and self-immolations will end anytime soon, especially when the Chinese government's only response so far has been to beef up security and increase its suppression in Tibetan areas. William Ide, VOA News, Washington.
All right, let me get back live here. China doesn't like this kind of thing. They're fine if you're practicing Buddhism, but you cannot be making statements like this. And so they come in and they crack down and they control it. And the message is very loud and clear. If you engage in this kind of behavior, then we are going to take care of it. I'm going to show you one other video with regard to Tibet. And since Xi Jinping announced the Belt and Road Initiative, which is Xi Jinping's vision of a, China connected with all of Central Asia, with Africa and so forth, they don't want Tibet causing problems. And so they are going to make darn sure that they are, keeping any kind of immolations or anything like that at bay. For the last 5 years or so, I would say the immolations have calmed down. There really haven't been very many. But the government, after they were kind of big, several years ago, they came right in and cracked down on all of that. This is an interesting little short video on Belt and Road Initiative, and it talks about how China is trying to appeal to its religious neighbors, especially the use of Buddhism, to try to, make inroads in various communities and cities to allow them to do what they want to do to create this economic integration.
What am Tibetan Buddhists around the world marched this week, commemorating the 60th anniversary of an uprising, brutally squashed by Chinese military, that forced the Dalai Lama and his followers into exile. These days, Tibet is considered one of the least free places in the world. That's because the Communist Party has developed sophisticated methods of micromanaging the plateau.
Today, one of the prime requirements for every monks and nuns is that they should be loyal to the Communist Party before they are loyal to their faith. So whether it's in terms of people's freedom of movement, people's language study, cultural preservation, everything is being dictated by the Chinese Communist Party.
In 1995, China kidnapped the 6-year-old successor to the Dalai Lama, replacing him with their own party-approved Lama. He is now one of the leaders of the Buddhist Association of China, which helps present China as a friendly superpower to its neighbors. It's not just ironic that China's atheist leadership is fostering religious ties with its neighbors, it's also smart. Buddhists make up a huge proportion of the population in countries that China wants to connect to its Belt and Road Initiative, a multi-billion-dollar project to dominate global trade. One goal, to get better connected to the oil-rich Middle East. So in the last decade, they've spent $2.5 billion on building oil and gas pipelines through Myanmar, directly connecting China to the Indian Ocean. In that same period, China actively worked to improve religious ties with Myanmar, a country that is 88% Buddhist. They've shared important relics with Myanmar's temples, agreed to build a Buddhist Association center in the capital, and even signed an official declaration of friendly religious relations, whatever that's worth. China is now trying to cut billions more in port and dam deals with Myanmar's government.
China's use of Buddhist diplomacy is significant because several of these countries are apprehensive of this giant power, whether the loans they are taking from China will drive them into a debt trap.
The most recent example of that is Sri Lanka. The country's president gave the Chinese a contract to build $1 billion port in his hometown, after they helped him and the country's Buddhist majority win a decades-long civil war. The Sri Lankan president was convinced the port would make his supporters rich, but it didn't. And just 8 years later, Sri Lanka was signing away a 99-year lease on a port located on one of the world's busiest shipping lanes as repayment.
Now, Sri Lanka's experience has become a cautionary tale for several other South Asian countries. The thing is, no other country has been able to match China.
Nepal might be the biggest benefactor. In 2011, it took a $3 billion loan to build the Buddha's hometown into a modern-day pilgrimage hub. Since then, China has become Nepal's largest foreign investor. And up until last year, Nepal banned its own citizens from celebrating the birthday of the Dalai Lama, the Buddhist that China hates the most.
In all these countries, you find that the public feels that, if we want improved infrastructure, it is only the Chinese who are willing to extend loans. So yes, there is concern, but there is no other alternative.
Okay, I'm back. So you can see that, we used to call this neo-colonialism when the U.S. was trying to throw its economic weight around in Latin America. This is what China is doing with the Belt and Road Initiative. They are loaning all kinds of money to developing countries or countries that don't have as much bargaining power, and then they are literally not able to, repay the debt, and they're having to lease back things to China. So, while boots on the ground, they're not going to make any overture and infringe on anyone's sovereignty. They cut these deals, which are really, really good for China and not so good for some of these other countries. But in this case, they're using Buddhist religion to accomplish what they want to around the world. Let's now go to the Uyghurs, because this is just an unbelievable development that's occurred really within the last year and a half or two. And the Uyghurs, which, if you can see this map here, is the green area. It is north of Tibet. It is a Muslim region, and they were independent in the 19th century. They want their independence back. Just like Tibetans want to be independent, so too does Xinjiang. And there have been rising ethnic tensions over the past, I would say, 2 decades, maybe, between the Chinese Han and the Muslim Uyghurs, is how they're pronounced. Now, one of the things that China has done to be really irritating is to encourage Han Chinese to move to this location, and they've incented them with land and benefits and all these kinds of things. Now they've got a Han Chinese person who's, the regional governor, if you will, I don't know what they call him, of Xinjiang, and they're really clamping down on the Uyghurs. A series of things have happened, including terrorist activities, that has made China lose its patience completely with allowing Muslims any freedom whatsoever. In 2009, the Urumqi riots, 156 died in an ethnic clash with Han Chinese. Part of this is a response to the fact that they don't like some of the traditions that the Muslims practice. And so they've not wanted them to practice their religion in the way they wanted. And this has caused, oppositional behavior. Well, this is not surprising. You start messing with people's religions, and they are going to object. In 2014, there was a terrorist activity where, there was a knife incident in Tiananmen Square, and a number of Han Chinese were killed by Muslim extremists from Xinjiang. So these terrorist activities that Muslims, extremists are known for, started to occur in China, and they just have zero patience for this. Their immediate response is always crack down. Their immediate response is to just send tons of soldiers into the area, make it into a police state, and, not let anyone do anything. Let me play you the Economist video. Actually, maybe I'll wait until the last. Well, I'll just play it. Let's just play it. It's really pretty good. It will tell you, just pay attention to what the Chinese are doing to crack down on the Uyghurs. It's like a police state, and they're under serious surveillance.
These people are systematically oppressed by their own government.
We've been waking up to horrific stories every day, heartbreaking images separating mothers from their children.
They live in a police state where they're monitored by one of the most advanced and intrusive surveillance systems in the world.
Imagine that the police force you to stand in front of a camera for biometric data collection.
Every online activity is tracked.
Imagine that the police force you to install spying app on your phone.
Their religion is restricted. Many traditional Muslim names are even banned for newborns.
Party officials are frequently attacking Islam as very old-fashioned, very backward.
These are some of the suspected detention camps, where an estimated 1 million Uyghurs are held. Many of them have not been heard from since being detained. Uyghurs are a Turkic-speaking Muslim minority in China, living mostly in the sensitive frontier province of Xinjiang. It's more than 4 times the size of Germany and borders 8 countries. It's home to some 11 million Uyghurs, but because of immigration from the rest of the country, today nearly half of Xinjiang's population is Han, China's dominant ethnic group. Nuri Tekel grew up in Xinjiang. A Uyghur now living in America, he campaigns against the oppression of his people. But speaking out against China can be dangerous.
I worry my public advocacy will cause some unthinkable consequences to my family members. I haven't seen my mother for 15 years. This is the mildest form of torture that the Chinese government is imposing on us.
The Communist Party seems determined to crush Uyghur identity and is going about it in a systematic way. Although China has long been suspicious of the Uyghurs, as it has been of many minority groups, its worries increased after Al-Qaeda's attack on America on 9/11.
After 9/11, the Chinese government taking an opportunistic position, claiming they are also a victim of global terrorism.
In the minds of the party leaders, the Uyghurs are different, and different is bad because the control of the Communist Party is the only thing that stands between China and total chaos. In addition to that, there had been outbreaks of terrorism. So there was a sense that Xinjiang especially was getting out of control and needed to be brought back in line.
In 2014, a group of Uyghur terrorists went on a stabbing rampage in Kunming railway station, killing 31 people. This was one of several attacks that fueled the government's hostility towards the Uyghurs.
The Chinese government likens Uyghur to a cancerous tumor, Uyghur Islam as a mental illness.
Relations between Uyghurs and Han Chinese in Xinjiang have been tense for years. An eruption of violence in 2009 led the Chinese government to step up security. But it wasn't until Xi Jinping came to power that China really tightened its grip on the Uyghurs. Between 2012 and 2017, China's domestic security budget doubled. In Xinjiang, it tripled. In 2016, Xi Jinping appointed Chen Cheng-kuo as the party secretary of the province. This was a calculated move to suppress the Uyghurs.
Chen Cheng-kuo is a handpicked official trusted by Xi Jinping, handling 2 of China's most sensitive regions.
Mr. Chen had a track record. He was party boss in Tibet from 2011 to 2016, another region where China wanted to crush ethnic unrest. He introduced a system of pervasive and insidious control. He increased police presence, stepped up the communist propaganda campaign in Buddhist temples, and created a culture of fear, encouraging neighbours to spy on one another. Now he has taken these tested methods to Xinjiang. Images of Xi Jinping have been placed in some mosques and on prayer mats across the province, an act that offends religious sensibilities. Beards and face veils have been banned, as have some halal products. This 800-year-old mosque is one of many that has been closed or bulldozed. The Uyghur language is banned in schools in parts of Xinjiang. Uyghur heritage is being wiped out.
It's a cultural genocide. It's a very specific purpose, systematic method, and ultimate goal. That is to stamp out Uyghur identity.
China is using world-leading hyper-surveillance techniques in Xinjiang. Face recognition cameras monitor Uyghurs on the streets. Spy apps track them online.
My own family have deleted me from their social media connections. Imagine that you missed your mother's and father's birthdays because contacting them will endanger their lives and may lead them to end up in the camps.
Party informants even spy on Uyghurs in their own homes. Roughly half of households are paired with a party member who can drop in at any time.
This official comes to their house, gives the children presents, talks to them about the wonders of Chinese communism, and of course reports back all sorts of details of interest to the authorities.
If you stand in the way, we'll take you in a cab. It's very clear policy.
Many Uyghurs have been detained in camps. China has spent hundreds of millions of dollars building at least 90 new compounds like these. People can be imprisoned for many reasons, or none at all.
We don't quite know how many people are in these camps, but probably the latest figures are at least 1 million people are in camps. Now, that's of the order of 1 in 6 of the adult population. That's an enormous number.
Inside, Uyghurs are brainwashed. There are also reports of inmates being tortured.
According to the survivors' personal account, they're forcing Uyghurs to denounce their religion. You have to allow us to convert you, to be reformatted, reprogrammed, to become just another Han Chinese.
China's official line is that the camps are designed to re-educate extremists and fight terrorism. But there's another reason, and it has to do with China's ambitious economic project known as the Belt and Road Initiative.
5年前我提出了共建“一带一路”的倡议。
Loosely based on the historic Silk Road, this vast collection of infrastructure projects seeks to connect China with Africa and Europe. This would significantly expand China's economic influence. It spans over 70 countries and will cost hundreds of billions of dollars.
Xinjiang is sort of central to Xi Jinping's grand project. That project is Xi Jinping's sort of signature foreign policy. And therefore Xinjiang is so important to that he just does not want any trouble coming from Xinjiang.
The Uyghurs are victims of China's determination to exercise complete control over its population. Their future is uncertain.
I don't want you to end up in history books. I want to live just like anyone else. And my people deserve to live in this world with respect and dignity.
Hang on. Okay. All right, everybody, so much to unpack. We'll come up, we'll get back in our last screencast and we'll talk about what you just watched. Just an excellent video on Xinjiang. All right, be right back.